On August 17, 1983, two fishermen navigating the murky waters of Bayou Lafourche in Terrebonne Parish, Louisiana, made a discovery that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Tangled in their nets, approximately 30 feet from the boat launch at the old Gautreaux Estate, they pulled up what they initially believed was a mannequin. The surface was bloated, discolored, and gnawed beyond recognition. But when one of them noticed the gold wedding band still clinging to what remained of a finger, the horrifying reality set in. This wasn't a mannequin. It was the third body to surface from these waters in 18 months. What made this discovery particularly chilling wasn't just the condition of the remains, it was the pattern of teeth marks that forensic experts would later identify. The body hadn't simply drowned. It had been deliberately placed in a feeding ground, where bull alligators, some exceeding 13 feet in length, had been conditioned to expect their meals. The fishermen had stumbled upon what investigators would come to call the disposal system, a method of murder concealment so methodical, so coldly calculated, that it suggested someone with intimate knowledge of both the bayou and predator behavior. But the truth was far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. Before we uncover the truth about the swamp keeper, Louisiana's bayou bodies, and the caretaker who fed them to alligators, a chilling case of using nature's most efficient predators to erase evidence, make sure to subscribe to the Silent Abbey and ring that notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into history's darkest corners. And please, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? We love hearing from our community of mystery seekers from around the world. Now let's step back into the sweltering Louisiana summer of 1981, where something sinister was taking root in the bayou. The early 1980s in southern Louisiana represented a time of profound economic and social transition. The oil boom that had sustained the region through the 1970s was beginning to sputter. By 1981, the national recession had reached even the most isolated bayou communities, and Terrebonne Parish was no exception. Unemployment in the parish hovered near 12%. Young people were leaving for opportunities in Baton Rouge or New Orleans, and the traditional industries, shrimping, crabbing, and moss gathering, were becoming increasingly unprofitable. The Gautreaux Estate stood as a monument to better times. Built in 1923 by oil prospector Henri Gautreaux, the sprawling property encompassed nearly 800 acres of prime bayou land, complete with a main house, several outbuildings, and most notably, a series of interconnected ponds and channels that had been carefully engineered for alligator farming. In the estate's heyday during the 1920s and 30s, the Gautreaux family had supplied alligator hides to fashion houses as far away as Paris and New York. By 1975, the estate had passed through several owners, each struggling to maintain the property's infrastructure. The main house, a beautiful example of Louisiana colonial architecture with its wide galleries and French doors, had fallen into disrepair. The alligator ponds, once meticulously maintained, had grown wild, their concrete barriers crumbling, allowing the channels to merge with the natural bayou ecosystem. Enter Marcel Thibodeaux. In May 1975, Marcel accepted the position of estate caretaker at age 42. To the remaining Gautreaux family members, most of whom had relocated to Metairie, a suburb of New Orleans, Marcel seemed like a godsend. He was a local man, born and raised in the bayou, with an encyclopedic knowledge of the land. He'd worked as a hunting guide, a trapper, and briefly as a wildlife officer before a personality conflict with his supervisor led to his resignation in 1971. Marcel lived alone in the old overseer's cottage on the northeast corner of the property. Neighbors described him as quiet, competent, and somewhat reclusive. He kept the property's fences mended, prevented squatters from occupying the abandoned buildings, and maintained the boat launches that provided access to Bayou Lafourche. He was known to feed the wild alligators that inhabited the old farming ponds, a practice that, while technically discouraged by wildlife authorities, was common among bayou residents. Marcel knew those gators like other men know their hunting dogs, recalled Eldon Bro, a neighboring property owner, in a 1984 interview with the Houma Courier. He'd call them by names he'd given them: Big Brutus, Cypress Queen, One-Eye Jacques. They'd come right up to the dock when he whistled. It was something to see, I'll tell you that. What nobody could see, what nobody could have imagined, was that Marcel Thibodeaux had discovered the perfect way to make problems disappear. The bayou was vast, dark, and held secrets far beneath its tea-colored surface, and Marcel had learned exactly how to keep those secrets. The stage was set, the method was perfected. All that remained was for the opportunities to present themselves, and in the economically desperate landscape of early 1980s Louisiana, Opportunities would soon arrive. The first documented disappearance connected to the Gautreaux Estate occurred on March 14, 1981, though authorities wouldn't make this connection until much later. Raymond Lee Parker, a 47-year-old transient from Arkansas, had been working odd jobs throughout Terrebonne Parish, staying in a tent camp near the intersection of Highway 24 and Bayou Road. Parker had mentioned to several people at the Boudreaux's gas grocery that he'd been hired for 3 days of work clearing brush at some old estate out past the boat launch. The store owner, Mrs. Corinne Boudreaux, remembered him specifically because he'd bought an unusually large amount of beer, 2 12-packs, which she'd found odd for a man supposedly heading to work. "I told him, Ray, that's a lot of beer for clearing brush," Mrs. Boudreaux recalled in her statement to police. "He just laughed and said the man who hired him said to bring refreshments, said it would be hot work." Raymond Lee Parker was never seen again. When he failed to return to the tent camp, his few fellow transients assumed he'd moved on to another parish or returned to Arkansas. This was common. Men drifted in and out of the bayou communities constantly, following seasonal work, staying ahead of warrants, or simply restless. No missing person report was ever filed. No investigation was launched. In the transient community, one man's absence barely registered as unusual. But in Marcel Thibodeaux's meticulously kept journal, discovered years later, there was an entry dated March 14, 1981. Cleared northeast section. Fed the boys well tonight. Brutus especially hungry. 7 months later, on October 23, 1981, a young couple from Houma vanished after telling friends they were going to check out a boat for sale somewhere along Bayou Lafourche. James Carrier, 24, and his girlfriend, Nicole Schexnader, 22, had been saving money to buy a fishing boat. James worked at a shipyard in Houma, and Nicole waited tables at a seafood restaurant. According to their friends, they'd seen a classified ad in the Houma Courier for a 16-foot Boston whaler priced well below market value. The ad listed only a phone number with instructions to call after 6 p.m. James had called the number from his apartment while 2 friends were present. They overheard him saying, "Yeah, we can come look at it tomorrow evening," and out past the old Gautreaux place got it. The couple left their apartment at approximately 5:30 p.m. on October 23rd. They never returned. This time, missing person reports were filed immediately. Nicole's mother, Marie Schexnader, was insistent that something was wrong. "Nicole called me every single day," she told Detective Louis Arsenault of the Terrebonne Parish Sheriff's Office, "every single day without fail. When I didn't hear from her by noon on the 24th, I knew something was terribly wrong." The investigation, however, hit immediate dead ends. The phone number from the classified ad belonged to a pay phone outside a convenience store in Chauvin, Louisiana, 15 miles from the Gautreaux Estate. The classified ad had been placed and paid for in cash. The newspaper clerk who'd taken the ad couldn't remember any distinguishing features about the person who'd placed it. Just a regular Cajun man, maybe 50, maybe 60, wearing a work shirt, a description that fit thousands of men in the parish. Deputies searched along Bayou Lafourche, interviewed residents, and even consulted with Marcel Thibodeaux, who claimed he'd seen nothing unusual. "Gets pretty lonely out here," Marcel told the deputies according to their report. "I'd remember if I saw a young couple in a nice truck like you're describing. Sorry, I can't help." The investigation eventually stalled. The prevailing theory among some deputies was that the couple had staged their own disappearance, possibly to escape debts or family conflicts. Others believed they'd met with foul play somewhere along the bayou, victims of robbery gone wrong, their bodies lost to the water. In Marcel's journal, the entry for October 23, 1981 read, 2 packages delivered and processed, Cypress Queen and Big Brutus both fed, disposed of vehicle components as usual. By mid-1982, Marcel Thibodeaux had established himself as the bayou's most reliable odd-job man. Need a dock repaired? Call Marcel. Need help clearing a clogged boat channel? Marcel's your man. He worked cheap, showed up when he said he would, and kept to himself. But he had developed a problem, Derek Comeau. Derek Comeau was a 36-year-old commercial fisherman who'd recently purchased a small plot of land adjacent to the eastern boundary of the Gautreaux Estate. Derek was ambitious, loud, and had big plans to establish a crawfish farm. He was also dangerously observant. In May 1982, Derek approached the Terrebonne Parish Planning Commission with complaints about suspicious activity at the Gautreaux Estate. According to the commission meeting minutes, Derek claimed to have witnessed someone, presumably Marcel, dumping what looked like heavy plastic-wrapped bundles into the old alligator ponds late at night. "I'm not saying it's anything illegal," Derek had told the commission members, but I'm trying to establish a food business here, and if there's contamination in the water system we share, I need to know about it. The commission had noted his concerns, but took no immediate action. The Gautreaux Estate was private property, and without specific evidence of environmental violations, their authority was limited. Derek wasn't satisfied. He began documenting what he called irregular patterns of activity at the estate, keeping a log of times when he'd see lights on in the old processing buildings, or when he'd hear Marcel's boat motor running at unusual hours, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., long after any legitimate caretaking work would be done. On June 18, 1982, Derek told his wife Renee that he was going to have a conversation with that weird bastard Marcel and settle this neighborly man-to-man. He took his boat out around 7 p.m. Derek Comeau's empty boat was found the next morning drifting near the property line, its motor still running. One of Derek's shoes was on the boat floor. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, nothing to indicate what had happened. The official determination was accidental drowning, despite Derek being an expert swimmer and bayou navigator since childhood. Even the best can slip, hit their head, go overboard, the investigating deputy had written in his report. The bayou doesn't forgive mistakes. Renee Comeau insisted her husband had been murdered, but with no body, no evidence, and no witnesses, the case was classified as a presumed drowning accident. In Marcel's journal, June 18, 1982, problem neighbor resolved, fed the boys extra portions, troublesome but necessary. By early 1983, the disappearances had begun to form a pattern that should have been obvious, but the dots weren't being connected. Part of the problem was jurisdictional. Some missing persons reports went to the Terrebonne Parish Sheriff's Office, others to Louisiana State Police, and transients like Raymond Parker were never reported missing at all. But in January 1983, something happened that should have triggered alarm bells, a failed attempt. On January 12, 1983, a 32-year-old truck driver named Thomas Guidry responded to another classified ad, this one for day labor, cash paid, heavy lifting required. The ad, like the one James and Nicole had responded to, provided only a phone number. Thomas called and arranged to meet his potential employer at a boat launch near the Gautreaux Estate at 8 a.m. on January 13th. Unlike previous victims, Thomas mentioned this opportunity to multiple people, including his supervisor at the trucking company and his roommate. He was excited about making extra money during his day off. When Thomas arrived at the boat launch, a man matching Marcel's description was waiting with a small aluminum boat. "We've got to go about a mile up the bayou," the man said. "I've got a dock that needs repairing, some heavy posts to set." Thomas climbed into the boat. But as they traveled deeper into the bayou, away from any other boats or fishing camps, something about the situation began to feel wrong to him. The man wasn't talking, wouldn't make eye contact, and kept checking his watch as if waiting for a specific time. When they reached an area thick with cypress trees and hanging moss, far from any structures, Thomas's instincts took over. As the man began to slow the boat near what appeared to be a feeding area, scrap meat was clearly visible floating in the water, and several large alligators were circling nearby. Thomas made a decision that saved his life. He jumped. Thomas Guidry dove into the murky water and swam as hard as he could toward the shore, expecting at any moment to feel alligator jaws or to hear a gunshot. Instead, he heard the boat motor rev up and recede into the distance. Thomas eventually made it to a fishing camp about 2 miles downstream, exhausted, terrorized, and suffering from hypothermia. He told his story to the camp owners, who called the sheriff's office. But when deputies arrived and Thomas described the location, he wasn't certain exactly where he'd been. The bayou all looked similar. And the man who'd picked him up. The investigation once again stalled. Thomas couldn't positively identify Marcel from a photo array. He hadn't gotten the license plate of the truck at the boat launch, and critically, nothing had actually happened to him beyond getting spooked and jumping out of a boat. Could be he misread the situation, one deputy noted in his report. Or could be the guy had bad intentions, hard to say. No crime was committed. Thomas Guidry left Louisiana 2 weeks later and never returned. Marcel's journal for January 13, 1983, package rejected delivery. Too alert, must be more careful with selection. The close call should have been a warning to Marcel. Instead, it only made him more cautious about victim selection. The feeding would continue. If this story is giving you chills, hit that like button and let us know you're invested in uncovering this dark chapter of Louisiana history. Share this with someone who loves dark mysteries and true crime. We're about to reveal the discovery that would finally expose Marcel Thibodeaux's horrifying secret. Let's discover what happens next. August 17, 1983. The discovery that would unravel everything. Brothers Philip and André Robichaud had been fishing Bayou Lafourche since they were children. They knew every channel, every submerged log, every good fishing spot within 10 miles of their home in Thibodeaux. On this particular Wednesday morning, they decided to try their luck near the old Gautreaux boat launch, an area they usually avoided because of the aggressive alligators known to frequent the area. "We'd been having bad luck everywhere else," Philip recalled in his deposition. "Figured we'd risk the gators for a chance at some good reds or maybe a catfish." At approximately 9:30 a.m. as they hauled up their gill net, they felt unusual resistance. Both brothers assumed they'd snagged on submerged debris, a common occurrence in the bayou. But as the net broke the surface, they saw it. The body was in an advanced state of decomposition, bloated by gases and bayou water. Large portions of the torso and limbs showed evidence of post-mortem animal feeding, the distinctive puncture marks and tears consistent with alligator predation. But the body was relatively intact, much more so than it should have been if it had been in the water for an extended period during Louisiana's hot summer. Most significantly, the body was weighted. Wrapped around what remained of the torso was a heavy chain, the type used for towing, and attached to the chain was a cinder block. The arrangement was deliberate, methodical. Someone had tried very hard to ensure this body would never surface. André immediately radioed the Coast Guard on their boat's VHF radio. Within 40 minutes, the scene was swarming with law enforcement, Terrebonne Parish Sheriff's deputies, Louisiana State Police, and forensic investigators from the State Crime Lab in Baton Rouge. Detective Louis Arsenault, the same detective who'd investigated the disappearance of James Carrier and Nicole Schexnader in 1981, was among the first senior investigators on scene. Years later, in an interview with Louisiana True Crime magazine, he described what he saw. "The moment I saw that body, the way it was weighted, the location, the evidence of the alligators, something clicked. This wasn't someone who'd drowned and was fed on by opportunistic gators. This was a disposal method. Someone was using the alligators as a tool." The forensic pathologist, Dr. Sarah Melancon, arrived by helicopter at 11:15 a.m. Her preliminary examination at the scene revealed several crucial details. The victim appeared to be male, Caucasian, between 25 and 40 years old. More importantly, there was evidence of trauma to the skull, a blow that almost certainly occurred before death. This individual was incapacitated or killed before entering the water, Dr. Melancon told Detective Arsenault. "The alligator damage is extensive, but it's post-mortem. He was already dead when he went in." Detective Arsenault made an immediate decision that would prove crucial. He ordered a comprehensive search of the entire bayou section adjacent to the Gautreaux Estate. What he didn't yet know was that he was about to uncover a killing field over the next 6 days as divers from the Louisiana State Police Marine Division methodically searched the murky waters. The true scope of Marcel Thibodeaux's operation came into horrifying focus. August 18, 1983, divers recovered a second body, this one female, in a similar state of decomposition. She was found less than 200 yards from the first victim, also weighted with chains and a cinder block. Her skull showed evidence of blunt force trauma. August 19, 1983, a third body, male, discovered in what the divers had begun calling the feeding zone, an area where algae growth patterns and disturbed sediment suggested regular activity. This victim was different. The body had been dismembered before being weighted and submerged. The clinical precision of the cuts suggested someone with knowledge of butchering. August 20, 1983, the divers made a discovery that turned everyone's stomach. In a deeper section of the old alligator pond, they found what Dr. Melancon would later describe as a disposal pit, a concrete basin, approximately 8 by 8 feet, that had been deliberately deepened. Inside this basin were human remains in various states of decomposition. The exact number of victims couldn't be determined on site, but skeletal fragments suggested at least 3 to 4 more individuals. August 21 through 22, 1983, the search expanded to the land portions of the estate. In an old processing building that had once been used for preparing alligator hides, investigators discovered a makeshift workshop. Inside, several blood-stained tarps, a commercial-grade bone saw, various tools including a butcher's cleaver, and most damningly, a journal. Marcel Thibodeaux's journal was a meticulous record of horror. Written in a neat, methodical hand, it documented each acquisition, each disposal, each feeding. The entries were clinical, devoid of emotion, reading more like a caretaker's maintenance log than a confession to serial murder. March 14, 1981. 1 package. Arkansas plates. Brutus response excellent. October 23, 1981. 2 packages, young pair. Vehicle disposal method alpha. Cypress Queen and Brutus both utilized. The journal contained 47 entries spanning from March 1981 to July 1983. Not all entries corresponded to discovered bodies. Some victims had been completely consumed or their remains were never recovered. But the pattern was unmistakable. Detective Arsenault later told reporters, "I've been in law enforcement for 23 years. I've seen murders, I've seen violence, I've seen what humans can do to each other. But I've never seen anything as coldly calculated as this." Marcel Thibodeaux had turned the bayou into his personal killing ground, and he'd enlisted nature's most efficient predators to erase the evidence. If those fishermen hadn't pulled up that net on that specific day, in that specific location, we might never have known. The search for Marcel Thibodeaux began immediately, but the caretaker of the Gautreaux Estate had vanished into the very bayou he'd used to hide his crimes. The manhunt was about to begin. The manhunt for Marcel Thibodeaux became one of the most intensive searches in Louisiana history. Within hours of discovering his journal, law enforcement had obtained warrants and marshaled resources from multiple agencies: the Terrebonne Parish Sheriff's Office, Louisiana State Police, the FBI's New Orleans Field Office, and even the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, given Marcel's intimate knowledge of bayou terrain. Detective Arsenault coordinated the search from a command post established at the Gautreaux Estate. "We knew we were hunting a man who could disappear into this swamp like smoke," Arsenault said in a 1985 interview. "He'd lived in these waterways his entire life. He knew every channel, every island, every place a man could hide. We had helicopters with thermal imaging, we had boats, we had tracking dogs. But Marcel had home field advantage." The search lasted 11 days. During this time, investigators worked to identify the victims recovered from the bayou. This proved challenging. Many of the bodies were severely decomposed, and dental records could only be obtained if someone had been reported missing and had received dental care. Dr. Sarah Melancon and her team of forensic anthropologists worked around the clock, using every available method: dental comparisons, bone measurements, analysis of clothing fragments, and in one case, a surgical pin that had been used to repair a fracture. By August 30, 1983, 4 victims had been positively identified. Raymond Lee Parker, Victim 1, the 47-year-old drifter from Arkansas. His identification came through a partial fingerprint recovered from a less decomposed section of tissue on his left hand, matched against an arrest record from a 1976 public intoxication charge in Little Rock. Nicole Schexnader, Victim 2, the 22-year-old waitress who'd disappeared with her boyfriend in October 1981. She was identified through dental records. Her mother, Marie Schexnader, collapsed upon hearing the news and had to be hospitalized. James Carrier, Victim 3, Nicole's boyfriend, identified through a surgical pin in his left tibia from a football injury in high school. Derek Comeau, Victim 7, the commercial fisherman who'd been suspicious of Marcel's activities. His identification came from dental records and a distinctive belt buckle recovered near his remains, a custom piece engraved with his boat's name, Renee's Dream, named after his wife. The other victims remained unidentified, and as of this writing, some still are. They're known simply by numbers: Victim 4, Victim 5, and so on. Each represents a person whose life was stolen, whose family may still be waiting for answers. The break in the manhunt came on August 28, 1983. A wildlife officer named Etienne Bro was conducting a routine patrol in the far reaches of Lake Boudreaux, approximately 15 miles from the Gautreaux Estate, when he noticed a small campfire on an isolated island known locally as Heron Point. The island was barely an acre in size, covered with dense palmetto and cypress, and rarely visited because it was infested with water moccasins. Officer Bro approached, cautiously, and discovered Marcel Thibodeaux sitting beside a dying fire, staring out at the water. Marcel didn't run. He didn't resist. According to Officer Bro's report, Marcel simply looked up and said, "I figured y'all would get to me eventually. These waters don't keep secrets forever." Marcel was armed. He had a .22 caliber rifle and a hunting knife, but he made no move to use either. He appeared to have been living on the island for at least a week, subsisting on fish and crawfish. He was severely dehydrated, suffering from infected mosquito bites, and, according to the psychological evaluation conducted later, in a state of dissociative crisis. The arrest was anticlimactic, almost surreal. Marcel Thibodeaux, the man who had terrorized the bayou for more than 2 years, who had fed at least 11 people, and possibly more to alligators, simply surrendered without a word of protest. The legal proceedings that followed were anything but simple. Marcel was charged with 11 counts of second-degree murder. Louisiana law required premeditation for first degree, and the prosecution couldn't definitively prove premeditation in every case. Multiple counts of improper disposal of human remains, and various lesser charges. His trial began on March 12, 1984, in Terrebonne Parish District Court, presided over by Judge Raymond Babin. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Paul Lacoste, presented overwhelming evidence: Marcel's journal, the physical evidence from the Gautreaux Estate, the testimony of Thomas Guidry, the truck driver who'd escaped, and forensic evidence linking Marcel to each of the victims. The case seemed airtight, but Marcel's defense attorney, appointed public defender Robert Delhomme, pursued an insanity defense. A team of psychiatrists examined Marcel over a period of 6 weeks, and their findings were disturbing. Marcel exhibited signs of severe antisocial personality disorder, showed no remorse for his actions, and described his victims in his interviews with psychiatrists as problems that needed solving, or packages that needed disposal. Dr. Vernon Keller, a forensic psychiatrist from Tulane University, testified that Marcel had developed what he termed dissociative utilitarianism, a psychological state in which he'd completely divorced himself from the humanity of his victims and viewed them purely as problems to be efficiently managed. Mr. Thibodeaux did not see these individuals as people, Dr. Keller testified. In his mind, they were obstacles, sources of potential problems, things to be removed and processed. He approached murder with the same mindset a sanitation worker approaches garbage disposal. The insanity defense failed. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. The efficiency of the deliberation shocked some observers, but as one juror told the Homa Courier afterward, he knew what he was doing. He planned it. He covered it up. That's not insanity. He was transported to Louisiana State Penitentiary at Angola, where he was housed in protective custody due to concerns about violence from other inmates. But the aftermath extended far beyond Marcel's conviction. The Gautreaux Estate became the subject of intense legal battles. The remaining Gautreaux family members, mortified by the property's association with the murders, attempted to sell it. No one would buy it. The property sat abandoned for years, becoming the subject of local legends and ghost stories. Eventually, in 1992, the state of Louisiana seized the property for unpaid taxes and incorporated it into the Terrebonne Parish Wetlands Conservation Area. The old buildings were demolished, and nature reclaimed the land. The families of the victims pursued civil suits against the Gautreaux Estate, claiming negligence in the supervision of the property. These suits were partially successful. Settlements were reached, though the amounts were relatively modest, given the estate's limited assets. The Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries conducted a comprehensive review of the alligators in the area. The question of what to do with the alligators that had fed on human remains sparked intense debate. Some argued the animals should be destroyed. Others pointed out that the alligators were simply behaving according to their nature and had been exploited by a human predator. Ultimately, the decision was made to relocate the largest, most aggressive alligators, including the ones Marcel had named Big Brutus and Cypress Queen, to a wildlife sanctuary in Lafayette Parish, where they could be monitored but would live out their natural lives. The decision was controversial, but wildlife experts argued that destroying the animals would serve no purpose except symbolic retribution. The case had a profound impact on law enforcement practices in Louisiana. In 1985, the state legislature passed the Bayou Victim Protection Act, which mandated better coordination between parishes in missing person cases and required regular patrols of isolated areas known to be potential dumping grounds. The law also provided funding for forensic resources to be made available to rural parishes that might not have the budget for extensive investigations. Detective Louis Arsenault retired in 1988, haunted by the case. In his final interview before retirement, he said, "Every body we pulled from that bayou represented a failure to connect the dots sooner, a failure to see the pattern. We got Marcel in the end, but we were months, maybe years too late. I think about that every day." Marcel Thibodeaux remained in Angola State Penitentiary for 37 years. He rarely spoke to guards, never received visitors, and refused all interview requests from journalists and true crime writers. He spent his time in his cell, reading books from the prison library, mostly books about Louisiana history and wildlife biology. On November 3, 2020, at the age of 87, Marcel Thibodeaux died of heart failure in the prison infirmary. His body was cremated, as per his written request, with the ashes disposed of by the state. No family members claimed his remains. His journal, entered into evidence during his trial, is now held in the Louisiana State Archives. It's available for research purposes, but it remains one of the most disturbing documents in the state's criminal history collection, a meticulous, emotionless record of a man who turned the bayou into his killing ground. The Swamp Keeper case, as it came to be known in criminology circles, had implications that reached far beyond the Louisiana bayou. It represented a new understanding of how serial killers could operate in rural environments, using natural elements as accomplices in their crimes. The case became a subject of study at the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit in Quantico, Virginia. Special Agent Douglas Hammond, who analyzed the case in 1985, noted in his report, Marcel Thibodeaux represents a subtype of organized serial killer who demonstrates extreme patience, methodical planning, and a sophisticated understanding of forensic countermeasures. His use of alligators wasn't simply opportunistic. It was a carefully developed method that exploited both the efficiency of scavenger predators and the jurisdictional challenges of investigating crimes in vast, difficult terrain. The case influenced how law enforcement agencies across the South approached missing person investigations in rural areas. Before the Gautreaux Estate murders came to light, disappearances in bayou country were often written off as drownings, migration, or people simply choosing to disappear. The case demonstrated that assumptions about accidental disappearances in remote areas could mask systematic predation. In 1986, a similar case emerged in the Florida Everglades. A hunting guide named Curtis Weldon was arrested after human remains were discovered in an area known to be an alligator feeding ground. Investigators directly cited the Thibodeaux case as the reason they pursued the investigation more aggressively than they might have otherwise. Weldon was convicted of 4 murders in 1988. The psychological profile of Marcel Thibodeaux also contributed to evolving understanding of serial killer typology. Unlike the disorganized killers driven by rage or sexual compulsion, or the organized killers motivated by power and control, Marcel appeared to be motivated by what Dr. Vernon Keller termed pragmatic elimination. His victims weren't chosen for sexual gratification or to satisfy violent urges. They were chosen because they represented potential problems or easy opportunities. What makes Thibodeaux so disturbing, Dr. Keller wrote in a 1987 paper published in the Journal of Forensic Psychology, is the complete absence of the usual psychological drivers we see in serial homicide. He killed not because he wanted to kill, but because he saw killing as an efficient solution to various challenges. A drifter needed work? Eliminate the witness. A couple wanted to buy a boat? Eliminate potential identifiers. A neighbor asked questions? Eliminate the curiosity. He approached murder with the emotional engagement most people bring to filing paperwork. The case also raised uncomfortable questions about vulnerability and victimology. Most of Marcel's victims were selected precisely because their disappearances would generate minimal investigation. Transients with no local connections, young couples who might have plausibly run away, or people whose deaths could be explained as accidents. Marcel had identified the gaps in the social safety net and exploited them with chilling efficiency. This led to reforms in how missing person cases are prioritized. 2130, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMECI, established in 1984, partially in response to cases like the Gautreaux murders, began working to create better databases and information-sharing systems for missing persons. The idea that some missing persons were less important than others, that a transient's disappearance didn't warrant the same resources as a child's or a prominent citizen's, began to be challenged more systematically. The Thibodeaux case also entered popular culture in ways that reflect our ongoing fascination with and horror at serial violence. In 1989, the case was featured in an episode of Unsolved Mysteries, even though it was technically solved. The episode focused on the unidentified victims, hoping publicity might lead to their identification. It did generate several leads, though none resulted in positive identifications. In 1995, author James Lee Burke published a novel, Burning Angel, that featured a villain clearly inspired by Marcel Thibodeaux, a bayou caretaker who used alligators to dispose of bodies. Burke, a Louisiana native, had followed the case closely and used it as the foundation for exploring themes of evil, complicity, and the dark. Undercurrents of bayou life. The Gautreaux Estate itself, despite being demolished and reclaimed by nature, remains a site of morbid fascination. Urban explorers and true crime enthusiasts occasionally attempt to visit the location, though it's now part of protected wetlands and trespassing is strictly enforced. Local tour operators in Manhunt Thibodeaux sometimes include references to the case in their dark history of the Bayou tours, though some residents find this commercialization of tragedy distasteful. Perhaps most significantly, the case forced a reckoning with the myth of the Bayou as a romantic, mysterious place separate from the concerns of modern society. The Bayou had always been portrayed in Louisiana culture as a place of beauty, tradition, and freedom, a last frontier where people could live close to nature and escape the complications of urban life. Marcel Thibodeaux's crimes shattered that myth. They demonstrated that isolation could enable predation just as easily as it enabled freedom, that the same characteristics that made the Bayou beautiful, its vastness, its wildness, its resistance to human control, also made it an ideal hunting ground for someone with dark intentions. "We had to confront an uncomfortable truth," said Eldon Bro, the neighbor who'd once admired Marcel's rapport with the alligators. "The Bayou isn't good or evil, it just is. It reflects what we bring to it." Marcel brought evil, and the Bayou kept his secrets for a long time. The broader implication of the Swampkeeper case might be this: evil doesn't always announce itself with dramatic gestures or obvious signs. Sometimes it presents itself as competence, as quiet efficiency, as someone who solves problems and keeps to themselves. Marcel Thibodeaux was successful not because he was extraordinarily intelligent or sophisticated, but because he understood the social and geographic landscape well enough to identify and exploit its vulnerabilities. And that perhaps is the most chilling lesson of all. The monsters aren't always the ones who stand out. Sometimes they're the ones who blend in perfectly, who do their jobs well, who make themselves useful to the community, while hiding darkness behind a facade of normalcy. The Bayou has reclaimed a land where Marcel committed his crimes. The water flows as it always has, dark and mysterious, keeping whatever secrets remain beneath its surface. But for those who knew the victims, for the families still waiting for answers about loved ones who vanished, and for the investigators who pulled those bodies from the murky water, the Bayou will never be quite the same. What do you think drove Marcel Thibodeaux to such calculated acts? Was it truly the dissociative disorder the psychiatrists diagnosed? Or was there something darker at work, a fundamental absence of human empathy that allowed him to view people as simply problems to be solved? Leave your theories in the comments below. Were there warning signs that should have been caught earlier? Could this happen today, in our more connected, surveilled world? If this story affected you, please subscribe to The Silent Abbey for more deep dives into the lost chapters of American history. The stories that reveal uncomfortable truths about human nature and the darkness that can hide in plain sight. Share this video with anyone who appreciates serious true crime content that goes beyond the sensational to explore the deeper questions these cases raise about society, psychology, and justice. And remember, in our community, we treat these stories with the respect they deserve, as tragedies that affected real people and communities, not simply as entertainment. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and we'll see you in the next video, where we'll uncover another forgotten chapter of America's dark past. This video is a dramatization based on composite elements of various criminal cases. Names, specific locations, and identifying details have been altered to protect privacy while exploring the psychological and sociological themes these cases represent. Our goal is education and understanding, not exploitation.